Welcome to Hamburgers and Horror, the home of meat, monsters, and masked teenagers seeking vengeance on their high school bullies. I'm Noah Hook, and today we're looking at the final.
Are you doing this to get even with us? For how we treated you?
Can you think of a better reason?
I do it because I know that you can't stop me.
There are more like us out there.
This 2010 horror film follows a group of high school outcasts who band together to get revenge on their bullies. They lure them out to a secluded farmhouse, and through a series of sadistic torture methods, they try to make their tormentors feel on the outside how they've been made to feel on the inside. The final was directed by Joey Stewart in his directorial debut, although he has produced a variety of low-budget films. The story was written by Jason Cavallati, who took inspiration from mass shootings like Columbine. And that is a subject I'll definitely be discussing more after the breakdown, so if you, for whatever reason, are sensitive to that kind of dialogue or discussion, this might be a good video to skip. He was interested in taking a story of victims turned villains, but with a more focused revenge plot that targets their bullies specifically. The final stars Mark Donato from Pay It Forward as Dane, Joshua Washington from Enemy of the State as Curtis, Lindsay Seidel from The Inflicted as Emily, Travis Tedford from The Little Rascals as Andy, Eric Eisenhower from Parks and Rec as Jack, and Vincent Silicon from Seemingly Nothing Else as Ravi. Cinematography was handled by David McFarland of The Boy Next Door and The Ballad of Lefty Brown, and the score was composed by Damon Criswell of Alternative Match and The Weapon. The final premiered at the After Dark Film Festival before being released to DVD. It was mostly met by negative reviews from critics who disliked the stereotypical characters, the not-so-great acting, and mostly the way that the film portrays the act of revenge and those seeking it. It currently has a 14 and 33% on Rotten Tomatoes, along with a 2.2 on Letterboxd, so the final isn't exactly a beloved film. But beloved or not, thank you so much to my patron Uncle Pete for requesting the final for me to review. This is one I had never heard of, so I was really interested in checking it out. And if you love horror movies like I do, be sure to check out Uncle Pete's channel. I'll leave a link down in my pinned comment with a link to one of his videos about Return of the Living Dead. But hey, with all of that said, it's probably time we get started. I hope y'all are ready for some serious teenage angst, because we're watching the final. The movie opens on a disfigured girl who wanders into a diner for a burger, good choice, although her face gets the attention of the entire restaurant. The prying eyes cause her to flip the table, declaring that she didn't choose to end up this way. Now we jump to the past, where we meet several high school students who are victims of bullying. There's Ravi, an Indian boy who is berated by racist boys Bradley and Bernard, emo girl Emily, who is berated by mean girls Heather, Bridget, and Kelly, banjo boy Jack, science geek Andy, and a boy named Dane. He's recently inherited a rural house from his deceased uncle, and he's got some sort of plan involving bear traps. This group of collective losers is anonymously throwing a costume party at Dane's new house, specifically inviting all those who have tormented them over the years. They've also enlisted the help of 3 outcast brothers known as the Triplets to act as security. There is one popular boy named Curtis who is friendly to the outcasts, inviting them to a video shoot he's starring in this weekend. The group all agrees that they don't want Curtis present at the party. Ravi is helping shoot behind the scenes footage for Curtis, but in the bathroom he's harassed by Bradley and Bernard. They smash his camera, and when Dane confronts them, Bradley slams him against the wall. He calls them both cowards and says the only reason he treats them so poorly is because he knows they can't stop him. Hey, it turns out Curtis is a real one though, as he fights Bradley the next day because of this. Dane holds a gun to his head as his parents fight in another room, declaring he won't be afraid when it's time to pull the trigger for real. Jack says goodbye to his uninterested father before setting up cameras around Dane's property with the plan to share their revenge across the internet. That night, the losers share their own personal hells over a bonfire. Andy posits that hell is suffering through the misery of everyday life, all while believing that the suffering has some greater purpose or meaning. Ravi's hell is his own silence, and Dane's is listening to his mom and dad fight endlessly. They feel completely justified in their actions, going so far as to say they're doing God's work. They even do a group prayer asking God to give them a sign to stop, but he does not answer. They switch into their very festive revenge outfits as the bullies begin arriving. We've got Andy the burglar, Jack the scarecrow, Emily the butterfly, Ravi the clown, and Dane the welder. The popular kids party it up, drinking, smoking, and having a good time while their masked assailants blend in with the crowd. They're upset to see that Curtis found his way here, and despite Ravi's protest, Dane says he can't leave and must be included in the plan now. The punch gets spiked, and after a few minutes, the teens start feeling a little woozy here. The group does a wardrobe change into scarier and, in Andy's case, more evil versions of their costumes. The bullies wake to find themselves chained to each other on the dance floor, and Dane uses a distorted electronic voice to welcome them. The good news is they aren't going to die, but the bad news is that by the end of the night they will wish they had. Some will be spared, but all will bear witness, just like they idly stood by in the hallways and classrooms while pain was inflicted upon them. One dude hits Dane with a yo mama joke, so Jack blasts him through the cheek and in the thigh with a cattle gun. Another dude asks why them, and Dane says they've been asking themselves that for years. They offer one person the chance to run for help, which is taken up by a boy named Tommy, although Dane warns that he will be hunted. He also takes a moment to share with his girlfriend Nadia that Tommy's been cheating on her with Heather. Womp womp. Tommy flees into the woods, but he runs right into one of those bear traps from earlier. The triplets drop him off back at the house, and he's placed into the injured white boy waiting room. Ravi stabs Bernard in the shoulder and pours some kind of liquid down his throat that immobilizes him. He also secretly drops a key next to Curtis so he can escape. Emily hops on top of Bernard and pays a little homage to Audition with some needles. It goes on for an uncomfortably long time, with Bernie looking like a porcupine by the end of it. Off to the injured white boy waiting room he goes. Curtis makes a run for it, and Ravi tackles Dane when he tries to shoot him. Dane considers this a betrayal and immediately stabs him in the heart to kill him. His homies are shook, but not enough to do anything about it. Curtis runs through the woods and finds a cop who pulled over Bradley earlier, but he's quickly gunned down by the triplets. Curtis grabs the cop's gun and makes it to the only neighboring home for Miles. It belongs to this older fella named Parker, who does not take kindly to a black teenager knocking on his door. Bonk! Next, Emily smears an acidic compound on Heather's face, which will slowly eat away at it. Bradley calls their spokesperson a coward hiding behind a mask, so Dane finally reveals himself to his tormentor. He says he would have been content to live his life scared and in the shadows, but it was Bradley's constant torture that forced him to finally empower himself. Emily, Jack, and Andy reveal themselves as well. Bridget apologizes to Emily for her cruel treatment, which touches Emily enough to offer her a way out. All she has to do is cut off all of Bradley's fingers. She can't bring herself to do it, so Emily reverses the offer to Bradley. The big bully does have it in him to cut off Bridget's digits, although Emily does stop him to give her a second chance to save herself. Emily smears the acidic compound on half of her face, promising to remove it if she cuts off Bradley's fingers this time. But Bridget stands firm and refuses to do it, even as her face begins to burn. Curtis wakes to find himself tied to a chair, with a very suspicious Parker not buying his story. He eventually gets the stubborn old veteran to listen, who heads over to the property himself. Bro walks right into a booby trap that stabs him in the legs, but he manages to kill off 2 of the triplets with his pocket pistol and pocket knife. Curtis manages to free himself and call the cops, and in a very funny bit of dark humor, he tells the police that a bunch of N-words are robbing Dane's house to get them there quickly. It's finally time for Big Bad Bradley to be tortured, with Dane repeating his bully's cruel words about not being able to stop him from earlier. He's promised not to kill him, but he's going to ensure that Brad can never hurt anyone else. He severs his spinal cord with a knife, paralyzing him from the waist down. Curtis comes across the dying Parker, who apologizes to him and tells him not to run and hide like he apparently did in the military. That's nice, I guess. This fella named Riggs makes the big mistake of opening his mouth, which means he has to get his tongue cut out. This is interrupted by Curtis, who threatens to kill them all if he has to. Dane says he wishes there were more people like him growing up, as they probably wouldn't be here today. Curtis shoots and kills Andy, good choice, and Dane shoots him in the shoulder. He prepares to finish the job, only for Emily to shoot him in the back. She declares that she's had enough, and she uses her final words to tell Kelly that all she ever wanted was to be friends. And if she, Heather, and Bridget ever took the chance, she really thinks they would have liked her. Jack shoots her in the back of the head, and as the police burst in, he shoots himself with the final message of,
There are more like us out there.
The police find the pile of disfigured teens, and an anchor woman describes how this violent attack took place without cause. At school, Curtis makes eye contact with the one triplet who managed to escape, and I have to wonder why the fuck he didn't tell the police about him. Kelly considers suicide in the bathroom, and the movie ends by confirming that the disfigured girl at the diner is Bridget. And that's the final. Yeah, I got a lot of mixed feelings on this one. Just off the basic premise and the terrible reviews it got, I went in expecting the final to be cheap, poorly made, potentially cringy, and at worst it may even be glorifying or promoting the idea of teenagers murdering each other. And there's a lot to unpack in that last point, but trust me, we'll get there. But overall, I was mostly pleasantly surprised by the final and the ways that it approached the subject matter. But starting off with the easy critiques, the film is definitely cheap and somewhat poorly made. The acting is pretty bad, the set design is fine at the school but pretty bad at the farmhouse, the lighting is bland at best, the pacing is painfully slow at times, and the editing constantly bounces us between characters and situations that seem out of order, making the story harder to follow than it should be. We cut away from the torture like 10 times just to check in on Curtis and Parker as they talk about Vietnam for some reason. But all of those elements are pretty much contingent on budget, and this is very clearly a low budget project, so I'm more lenient and forgiving on those kinds of technical issues. So my truly big concern going in was that the film was going to be glorifying or promoting the idea of a bunch of incel, Nazi, school shooter type teenagers murdering their bullies. Okay, bear with me as I go on a little bit of a tangent. It's weird, the film actually got me to do a lot of introspection and research on the concept of revenge within the horror genre. The reality is that revenge has always been a popular genre staple, with teenage revenge being a particularly constant and popular version of it. Carrie, Heathers, Slaughter High, The Craft, Tamra, and of course the Scream franchise are centered around teenage revenge, and in a lot of those cases it's the outcasts, losers, freaks, and geeks finally standing up to their bullies and making them pay. Sometimes it's horrific, but it's often depicted as triumphant and justified. The high school jock bully was an especially popular trope in the 80s, especially with things like slasher movies, and nowadays every TV show and film that takes place in the 80s and has kids or teenagers in it has some kind of really over-the-top bully that harkens back to that. Stranger Things and the 2 new It movies are great examples. The bully is a classic archetype that we love to see get bested, but In more recent years, there have been real-life things happening that have made this subject matter a little bit harder to tackle. There's a lot that goes into this, but the biggest thing that comes to mind is school shootings. This is probably a generational thing, but when I think of the words teenage revenge, I don't think about campy slashers or a big doofus bully finally getting outsmarted or punched by the nerd. I think of real-life teenagers and young men who, for one reason or another, snap and walk into their school with a loaded weapon and fire it upon their peers or total strangers. My generation grew up doing active shooter drills, and I remember growing up with teen soap operas like Degrassi where there were bullying arcs where someone would eventually bring a knife to school, and there was even a school shooting episode. Obviously, bullying still took place. It was middle school and high school, but we all were somewhat cognizant of the fact that school shootings were a real thing and it's something that could happen to us. And unlike the freaks and geeks of the 80s that could only dream of their revenge and watch it unfold in an unlikely movie plot, any angry person can get their hands on a semi or automatic weapon and waltz into their school. And I'm not trying to make this a big political discussion about the Second Amendment or who is doing the school shootings and why. That's a big discussion that's not really fit for a YouTube video like this. My point to all of this is that there are basically no contemporary movies about teenage revenge because of all of the real-life violence currently associated with high schools, or at the very least, none of the few I can think of involve guns. The Final is kind of an oddity in that regard, and it fully knows and leans into it. It is happily tackling subject matter that no other horror films are touching. Dane, Ravi, Emily, Jack, and Andy carry every single trait you would come to expect for a bunch of angry, suicidal, outcast teenagers with murderous ideations. The casting and character dressing was honestly really well done. All 5 of them convincingly carry the traits and talking points of various shooters, other killers, and most importantly, their online sympathizers. But that in itself is incredibly uncomfortable, and it really complicates the typical bully-victim dynamic that the viewer comes to expect. And this is a big part of why I think The Final has a lot of really negative reviews. People watch it and they can't decide if they should be rooting for the classic racist jocks and the mean girl bullies, or the angry outcasts who now embody so many characteristics of real-life tragedies. I saw a lot of reviews where people felt like you were supposed to full-heartedly root for Dane and the others, partially due to that history of rooting for the nerds I was talking about, and they felt that the movie was glorifying these cringy, incel, Nazi school shooter sentiments. But I actually don't think that's the case, at least not fully. I think the film did a pretty good job of illustrating that the outcasts are not the heroes of the story that they think they are. Yes, the bullies are depicted to be absolute pieces of shit, but the entire rest of the film is evidence that the outcasts are no saints either. The entire point is that an eye for an eye doesn't work and 2 wrongs don't make a right. Dane becomes so obsessed with revenge that he mercilessly kills Ravi for trying to save Curtis. He argues that he's simply the monster that Bradley and the others created, and while that may be true, it doesn't change the fact that he is now a monster. And all of this leaves The Final without a good guy. There's no protagonist to root for. It just turns into a bunch of shitty people inflicting pain on each other, which isn't really my cup of tea. In theory, there could be moments where the outcasts are getting revenge on the bullies and it's super satisfying, but it never is because the outcasts are taking it too far and they're too unlikable. There are moments where I do feel bad for Ravi and Emily especially, but those moments are undercut when they do some weird shit 2 minutes later. So it's not so much that I think this movie is truly problematic and trying to promote real-life violence in any way, but I'm also not captivated or really emotionally attached to any of the characters, and I don't really care about what's happening to them on screen. All of this leaves The Final feeling like a lot of the other 2010 Saw and Hostel ripoff torture porny type movies. It feels a lot like the movie Would You Rather in particular, where you kind of just watch a bunch of shitty people get systematically tortured until the movie ends. And while that isn't innovative, it's not a totally bad thing either. I myself put on a ton of random movies on Tubi and other apps just because it looks like they fit into a particular genre. Sometimes I want a shark movie, sometimes I want a home invasion movie, sometimes I want a more torture porny film, and The Final did scratch that itch. I do think there should have been a lot more blood in this film, but other than that, there was a good amount of variety when it came to the violence on screen. The booby traps were a fun surprise. I did like that the spine severing kept everything off screen to leave it up to our own imagination, and I've never seen a finger cutting scene that didn't make me wince at least a little bit. And aside from the Nazi outfit, which I truly do think is one of the elements that caused so many people to hate this movie, there are some cool things going on with the costumes. Emily's mask in particular is super creepy. It also pays a lot of homage to different movies like Deliverance and Audition, so there's fun little Easter eggs in there to find as well. All in all though, The Final is a simple film wrapped up in a lot of complicated issues. I think it mishandles its themes a bit too often, thus losing any kind of coherent message, leading to people reading what they want out of it more than anything. Depending on your own perspective, most notably your own high school experience, you may have a pretty strong feeling about this one. It moves classic revenge tropes into the 21st century, injecting the story and characters with traits and talking points from a lot of uncomfortable and tragic real-life events. I can't say I enjoyed The Final, but I did end up thinking about it for a long time after watching it, trying to come to terms with what I thought its message was and how I felt about that. I could absolutely understand if you absolutely hate this film and the things it's doing, but I also think that there are a lot of different elements who value and enjoy in here as well. If you are in the mood for something really dark and twisted while still being pretty tropey and having some fun at the same time, The Final is definitely a film to add to your watch list. Well, that's about it. Thank you so much to my patron Uncle Pete for requesting The Final for me to review, and remember that you too can request films for me to review by joining the Patreon. It's only $5 a month and it helps me out a ton. But have any of you seen The Final, and if so, what did you think of it? Be sure to let me know down in the comments. And be sure to join me in 2 weeks as we check out a 2000s classic with 13 Ghosts. Thank you all so much for joining me, and an extra thank you to my patrons. As always, I'm Noah Hook, and thanks so much for watching Hamburgers and Horror. Stay safe out there. Thanks so much for watching my review of The Final. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe so you can keep up with all my horror reviews. And if you want to help support the channel further, you should check out my Patreon account. You'll be able to vote for future movies and franchises I cover on the channel. Thanks y'all.